Everybody. My name is Mark Pafford. Today we have Roseanne Wood to my right. And there's a purpose for her being here today. And a gentleman by the name of Reggie Fullwood, who happens to be a representative, state representative from Duval, Jacksonville area. And he is one of our top folks here in the Democratic caucus on the subject of public education. And so today what we wanted to do, I'll just kind of talk to this generally. We wanted to talk about education. We wanted to talk about some of the things that are going on. Of course, we'll open it up to other subjects as we normally do. Sometimes there's other questions on current events. But education in the state continues to be a real big issue. Parents, teachers, families, and corporations all depend on a solid public education system, something that's found in our state constitution. And they depend on us doing a good job putting it together, funding it properly, and looking at innovative ways to do it better. Right now we've got some issues in terms of in my opinion, on funding levels. They're not historic. The governor, I don't believe, has been authentic in terms of representing that funding issue as well as he could. I think in Palm Beach County, the actual per student it should be over $8,000. In his budget, it's $7,000 and change per pupil. And that creates a lot of hardship. Certainly the testing situation continues to be a serious threat, in my opinion, to the educational system that we have in Florida. I've got some opinions on that. But one of the things that I annually do, this is my last session, and I think every session that I've been part of, I've reflected on the fact that there aren't a lot of real people that are part of this process up here. And I don't think there's any coincidence that it's a heck of a long drive to get up here. I don't think it's any coincidence that the press and media, and thanks for being here, have a very serious job to do to report back to the rest of Florida the things that go on here. And so I think it's our responsibility to bring real people into the system so we can understand what the significance is of our decisions on the outside world. The people of the state. In today's meeting, education, and again, those families and parents and people who are depending on the system. So I'm going to turn it over to Reggie if he'd like to say anything, and then Roseanne will jump in, and then we can do questions. And as I said, we can open it up to whatever you like. Reg?
Thank you, Leader Pafford. You mentioned one thing I think is really important. We're going to hear the governor and others talk about this record funding for education. Well, we know that one of the challenges with that is, though, although the dollar figure may be a record number, when you add in inflation and the fact that the shift to funding education has now been shifted to our local governments. If you look back 5, 6, 7 years ago, the state government was paying for about between 50 to 55% of the overall allocation per student. Now that has shifted to the municipalities in the form of the property taxes. So property taxes have slowly creeped up. The municipalities are funding more of our educational system, and that shouldn't be the case. So while we're talking about record funding for education, and that they haven't talked about the student growth and inflation. So that's a concern. Also, on the accountability side, they talk about accountability and the need for these tests and accountability. But I had a parent in my office, a voucher parent, who said, "You know what? Life is so much better now that my kid is out of public school and we're at this private school." I said, "Well, what's the big difference?" And she said, "Well, now my child doesn't have to take at the time it was FCAT, doesn't have to take the FCAT." And that's a big stress relief, and my child is making great grades. I said, "Well, are there any end of course exams or any exams at the end of the year?" It's like, "No, we just kind of take our classes and keep going." And so it's funny that they support these voucher programs with very little accountability associated with them. But our kids in public school have to be tested and over tested. So, it's a concern. So as we go into the budget portion of session, those are going to be some of the points that we try to stress that, let's talk real when we're talking about education.
Great. And yeah, jump in.
If I could jump in, because what you said is so perfect. Teachers right now feel shamed and blamed. And, we all like a little bit of challenge. Everybody does.
So,
But nobody likes to be shamed. And so we've got a system now that the higher socioeconomic school you're in, the more likely you're going to get a high grade. So all the incentives are to go to those schools. And what's happened is our lower socioeconomic schools, who have the biggest challenges, do not have any of those incentives. They're upside down. If we're going to spend more money on education, why don't we spend more money on incentives for teachers to teach in our struggling schools? And we're not doing that now. We're giving money for SAT scores that have no correlation to effectiveness in the classroom. I mean, as a principal of 32 years, I can see that kids are very frustrated, they feel very pressured, their teachers feel very pressured, their principals feel very pressured, and stress rolls downhill. So that you have little 5- and 6-year-olds who get sick at their stomach to go to school because they know they're going to spend a lot of the day drilling for the next standardized test.
well, and let me just say,
Yes.
I experienced that last year. My daughter was in 3rd grade last year, so it was her first year
Oh,
of
3rd grade's a big
standardized
grade,
tests,
yeah.
and she and my wife were stressed out, and it was
Yes.
very, very concerning. So I felt it personally.
And I understand why those parents from private schools say we like it because there's no stress on tests. Now, how is that fair? What's
Well-
good for the goose is good for the gander is what my mama taught me.
There you go.
Right. And, I don't think there's any, I think what we're hearing is these are symptoms of a broken process. And frankly, this legislature has a habit of purposely breaking systems that are working to create models that work for, a lot of times, people that benefit in the private sector, whether it be friends or people who make campaign contributions. In this particular situation, if you were to remove high stakes exams, you would basically fail to have a trigger for a lot of the vouchers and a lot of the reason to create a education system outside of the traditional public education system here. And to be very clear, what I'm saying is this. You had an FCAT, it didn't work. You had a former governor who tampered with the system, and that would be Jeb Bush. And unfortunately, when you tamper with systems and you look at creating something that I think is a little more devious, which is a education system outside of the public education system, but funded by tax dollars, you're always going to need a trigger to create that voucher type of system. So the standardized tests that we have should be benefiting teachers, students, parents, should be benefiting a private sector that's demanding a highly skilled workforce. And frankly, in my opinion, these tests are being used as a mechanism, as a trigger to funnel tax dollars to a system of education that's different and that is not found in our Constitution, the state Constitution, and that is a problem. And, so when we hear about schools that are having trouble, public schools, and we hear about these systems outside of the traditional school system, public school system, that students are finding it easy, and aren't accountable, then that's a serious question we have to begin grappling with. And there's some bills out there. I don't know if we want to talk about that in terms of creating a education commissioner that's elected that basically hopefully moves a lot of these decisions outside of the legislative process where, again, in my opinion, I don't know if we have experts like Roseanne or Reggie, frankly, that can sit back and analyze these types of issues is at the level that we need them analyzed. If you want to
Well,
say some more, and then
I'm just
we'll do
thinking
some
back
questions.
in the real world, at the school level, you have to wonder why teachers aren't encouraging their own children into going into teaching. You know, that's a sad thing. My grandmother was a principal, and she encouraged me
wow.
my whole life. You know, go into education. It is for the public good. And I think every teacher out there is doing it for the public good. But they're not encouraging their children to go into it because of the stress that they feel and the pressure they feel. And, you know, frankly, the blame that they feel. You know, teaching's always been the most respected profession. Everybody knows it doesn't pay well, but at least you had that respect. And now, because of the school grading system and the labeling system, you know, the harder school that you work in, which is generally high poverty schools that have the biggest challenges, you get the least rewards. Financially, you also have to wear the scarlet letter around your neck. You know, I'm at a D school, and then of course the parents in that neighborhood think, oh gosh, my public school must not be good, which is not true. But the way the system works is that you're so handicapped as a school because it has a lot to do with your incoming students. What we should do is we should judge schools on the gains that they make with their children. And that's fair because you can't control who comes in the door, and you want to welcome everyone in the door. But our current system kind of discourages you from doing that because, you know, a lot of students just don't score well on standardized tests. And those become the students that you know, you're not, every school welcomes kids, but you know, it's not as rewarding because you're blamed for those results. So that's why I'm so concerned about our current school grading system. It shames and blames and doesn't reward the right people.
Reg, you want to jump in, or do you want to do questions?
Let's do questions.
Fire away.
I have
A question, thank God.
I have two.
Oh, it's a bonus round.
Yeah.
Good.
So I want to put both ideas in front of you all. A person was describing to me that with the state of teaching,
Yes.
with the faculty in Florida, public schools, that it's been sort of like a perfect storm. Teachers have been demonized. They have been underpaid for 8, 9 years, or without a pay raise for 8 or 9 years. And then when you have all the flaws with the accountability system, it's created a perfect storm where people are leaving the profession. Like here in Leon County, I think this is the first time that they've reached more than 50% of the faculty in public schools do not have tenure, do not have job protection. Are you seeing evidence of that we are losing teachers and are having a hard time? I heard that Broward County went to job fairs in the Midwest to recruit teachers.
Well, the reputation of Florida, unfortunately, is it's a really difficult place to teach, that you don't get to really teach your kids. You have to spend all your time preparing for tests because that's how you're judged. And teachers don't go into the profession to prepare kids for tests. They go into the profession to teach kids. And I know at my school and every school in Florida, if you're teaching and suddenly a third of your kids are called out to go to the library, to kick all the kids out of the library so they can practice on the computer for the upcoming test, the next day the other third is pulled out, the next day the other third. So it's like you're teaching in a zoo, in a circus, because all the emphasis is on we have to have these kids do well on standardized tests, otherwise our school will be graded poorly and no one will think we're a good school and no one will send their children there. That's a big problem. And yes, it's really reflecting in teacher morale. And teacher morale is not good in this state. And I think if you went to that rally the other day, you could see that people are upset. They feel like this is not why they went into teaching. They want to help every child and they don't want to care at all how that kid enters and what their beginning test score is. We should have tests. Teachers need tests to judge progress. We've always had tests. Now, I was a teacher. I wanted to know if my kids learned what I taught. But these tests, you never even get the results back. I mean, you wait a year and you get a number. He did as a number 2 in algebraic thinking. Well, what does that mean? You know, as a teacher, you can't do anything with that. So all these end of course tests and everything, you don't even know as a teacher, did you teach the kids? Because you might get a score back 5 months later. But your professionalism, your ability to teach is going to be judged on that. So of course, you focus on it. And it's not right.
There was a story of a lady who was here at the rally who is graded as a high-performing teacher. decided that she couldn't do it anymore because she didn't want her kids going through this system with a high stakes test, and she refused to participate with her students in her class. She just felt like the system is so broken that she wanted to remove herself from it. And when we have good teachers who are saying, look, I just can't do it anymore, I mean, we have a problem.
That's right.
Well, and I know you have a second question, but I mean, this gets back to the opt-out issue. And, I've not spoken to either one of them about this, but frankly, I support that effort entirely. I hope every parent begins to try and take time to understand how serious this issue is, that their children are being subjected to tests that in the end don't amount to much, that the data that comes from those tests are sometimes shared so late it doesn't matter. And frankly, as I said previously, you have to question the purpose of these tests, whether they're being used in the best way for children and advancing a public education system, or whether in fact they're being used to create a bastardized type of education system that's dependent upon the private sector, that's dependent upon private and sometimes corporate motivated institutions, and frankly, that is based in many cases in religious schools. I mean, that could be what these tests are being used for. That's what it looks like, because if you're opting out of taking these tests, there's a reason. You don't prepare your child to break a seal and sit there for 2 hours and break a rule. And that civil disobedience is beginning to rear its head. And I applaud those parents who have that courage to do it, because otherwise, with the system we have up here and with our leaders in the legislature and certainly the governor, they're just kind of going along with something that seems to be broken. And so I hope those parents listening take time to understand how serious it is, that action of opting out, but how important that message is to people that are elected. You had a second question?
Yeah, it goes back to that trigger. The high stakes tests used to be a trigger to funnel money into the scholarship program, into vouchers. So, as I understand it, the thinking was, for experimentation, there was a need to set up a separate system where experimenting in educational strategies could take place. There's not value in that in that perspective.
Well, we don't have any accountability, so we don't know if it's working.
Yeah, how do we know?
Yeah, how do you know? We don't know if kids are graduating. We don't know if they have skills. We don't know anything because there's nothing required.
There's no data.
So, but what we do know is that millions of dollars are being redirected outside of our public education system, tax dollars. So if you're a Tea Party, a member of the Tea Party, or a conservative fiscal person who bases their politics on spending dollars efficiently and wisely, you should be concerned, because there is no accountability. This is millions of dollars. This year's budget alone, I believe, is 75.
I heard $590 million was going to go to this program this year.
Right, and if you look at charter maintenance and capital outlay, I believe it's $75.2 million in this current, probably the governor's budget, split between charter and public schools. So we do know something. We do know we have a system that's not accountable, that doesn't drive data the way it should drive data, and so that's not working. But for whatever other reason, the legislature and the governor have decided to redirect public tax dollars. And to your point, I think there is a good purpose for charter types of thinking. That's what they were created for, to basically allow a opportunity for things that just were not offered in a public school environment to be offered. What we have is a charter school and voucher system that has been injected with some weird, wacky type of steroid, and they're way out of place at this point, and they're driving our traditional public schools into a grave. And that's what's happening. And so when you're opting out, you're reacting to that. When you're having a press conference with Reggie and Roseanne at the beginning of session, I'm trying to respond to that by bringing real people from the outside, and that's what doesn't happen enough. There are no windows in the chamber. The people of Florida depend on people who are elected to say something and to be part of the system that they're experiencing. And that when that does not happen, and that's not happening, then I have to be, able to point my finger at the people I work with and invite them, hopefully, to a type of atmosphere where we have external influences that are real and aren't necessarily contributing to campaign accounts.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
No.
Did you like that? Thank you. Questions? Anything else? I mean, the budget's coming up. We can talk about anything.
Well, I have another question.